Anyway, well, thanks for coming on the channel. Thanks for being here. Do you want to give a little
Yeah,
bit of introduction to yourself, what you do at Auth0, and a little bit about your background?
yeah, I'd love to. First, this is my first stream ever, so this is that's kind of cool. Never done anything like this before. Um, so my name's Josh. I've been developing for a decade and a half or so, mostly freelance and agency stuff for a long time, and then joined Auth0 about 3 years ago. I was doing open source and SDKs, doing mostly PHP and Ruby stuff. And then moved over to our ecosystem team, which handles, some folks may have seen the marketplace just launched. So that was what we put out. So basically helping developers integrate with Auth0. And you do that through something very similar to what we're going to talk about today, which is, sort of stateless JavaScript that passes data through, does stuff, calls out, makes changes, sends stuff back. So people can change how their authentication pipeline works. And then partners can come in and create integrations themselves. So they can build, say you run a SaaS cloud database or something, you can have an integration that saves things, caches things, however you want it to work. So I've been on that team as lead engineer and partner, kind of a partner liaison, so helping developers build on there directly. And we've been doing that I've been on that team for about 6 months or so. Feels like
Oh,
longer.
cool.
COVID has made
So,
everything feel longer.
so you just changed teams after I met you. That was
Yeah,
like after January 6th, right? Yeah.
yeah. So March, the March class was our last in-person class. You were the third to last class I ever
Mm-hmm.
did.
Yep.
We were just ramping up. You were probably one of the first that got the whole product
Uh-huh.
identity size. That was like 3 really intense days. I'm
Yep.
sure you remember.
I do.
So we were really we were dialing it in and getting it polished up, and then March was the last class. In fact, our offices closed while we were doing the training, and the offsite was
Mm.
canceled while we were doing the training. So like
Yep.
Thursday or Friday, they said offices closed, and I said, okay, everyone, you can go back to your hotel rooms and Zoom this if you want to. Or very weird
Oh,
time.
yeah, that's a rough thing to do because it's pretty intensive, especially for people that are new to it. And I was certainly new to all authentication stuff, which
Yeah,
like for people that are looking to apply for potential jobs or work for specific companies, don't think that you have to know that stuff before you apply. Like in my interviews, I was like, I don't know any of this stuff, but
hmm
I'm willing to learn and I'm excited to learn. So just to get back to the general idea of the title here is Netlify Serverless Functions. I think a lot of this will just kind of apply for serverless functions in general. So we'll talk about some of the specifics of Netlify, but if you have questions or comments or things around serverless, and then if you want to get a little more general into Jamstack and just that realm of stuff, throw your questions out there. One of the things that I'm actually really curious about, and I was really interested just in your experience working on SDKs, like people have the question of like, have you worked in open source? And I have a lot of things on GitHub because I have content
hmm
and courses and stuff, and it's reference material that people go to. But I wouldn't say that I work in open source. Like I'm not the kind of person who's like constantly tracking issues, who's constantly doing updates based on feedback and that sort of stuff. So I think that's really cool. Do you want to do like a minute or two just on your experience of working in open source or working on the
yeah,
SDKs team for the stuff that is open source?
yeah, absolutely. It's a really cool place to be. Being that close to the folks that are using Auth0 and using our libraries and everything was, you learn so much so
Yeah.
fast, and the community is fantastic. Like you might read stories about frustrated people and issues or whatnot. We got our fair share of frustrated folks, but as soon as you reply back with, hey, here's what might be going wrong. Oh, I think we actually are doing something wrong on our side. The vibe's really good,
Yeah.
and it's so good to be that close to how the stuff is made. Um, in particular, it's really fun to sort of craft the interface that developers are using to make this happen. Like, we oftentimes we talk about like a user experience being something visual, buttons, where the drop down goes, or how I flow through a system. We have a whole domain called the developer experience because we're developer first platform. So we focus a lot on, what does a method sound like? What is the name of the method? Is it too long? Is it descriptive enough? Which you should, you in particular probably are pretty tuned into that. We were talking about that when we
Hmm.
were pairing on one of your
Yeah.
functions. It's like your naming is really good. It's like 2 weeks and seconds. I know exactly what that does. Get token
I
this, that, the other.
I don't know if you know this, but I'm currently teaching a boot camp at nights. And I feel like
Oh
I
wow.
overdo it sometimes, but in the boot camp, I'm like, I can't iterate enough. Like your variable name should have meaning to them. And the reason, especially for beginner developers, is as they start to do like a for loop and then a nested for loop or a nested if condition, like it's so hard for them to track and understand what things are. So instead of
Hmm.
having to go back and figure out what this piece of data is, if you name it appropriately, you don't have to. Like it tells you what it is, even if you forgot what you're actually working with. It should be kind of inherent there. But I think sometimes
Yeah.
my names become a little too long, but that's kind of a different story.
Well, it's key too, especially, a lot of folks that are using our SDKs, you might be a developer for 10 years, but it's just your first time integrating some OAuth2 or OpenID Connect library. And it's already very confusing, like identity is a tough thing to do right. So as much as possible, as teammates, we would review each other's PRs and say, does that really make sense? Like that's a
Hmm.
public method. That's going to be that way for 5 years, 8 years.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of fun. I miss it quite a bit, but I still have some like feelers in that because some of the stuff we do around this extensibility use open source libraries or some of our templates right now are open source. So I still get to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's, well, one, it's interesting to think about like how you can progress throughout a company, right? You're doing a
Hmm.
fairly different job, but there's still overlap and there's still things that you enjoy from both that you get to be a part of, I would imagine, going forward. And I don't
Yep.
know, like for me, what I just enjoy content and I enjoy this sort of stuff. And
Hmm.
SEKs, that sort of interaction is pretty similar to what we do in developer advocacy because you're in
Absolutely.
tune, right, with the people that are actually using it and you're doing your job based on their feedback to make sure that it makes the most sense for them.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I thought like just kind of hearing about your job originally and then seeing you being able to teach, like that's a big part of what I do and what I enjoy. So maybe one day that would be something that would be an option for me down the line. But at this point, like I enjoy doing the content piece of getting out to
Sure.
people too. So
Yeah. Well, I
um,
think working in public too is so much fun.
yeah.
Having your work out there. I blog a fair amount, and
And
even
now
if
you
it's not some
stream.
library. And now I'm a streamer. Now I'm a top Twitch
Professional, yeah.
streamer.
And
I'm
I
following,
don't.
like, hanging on your coattails here.
That's right. I don't know if you saw some of the comments, but you got a couple of, when you said this was your first one, you got a couple of supportive comments just saying, "Welcome to the streaming world." And if people in
Thank you.
chat, if you don't mind, one more time, just for like a confidence boost, leave a couple of encouraging first time streamer messages for Joss in the
Nice.
chat.
I was kind of watching it, but then the video on the stream is just out of sync enough to kind of throw me. I keep seeing my
Yep.
face doing something different. So
Yeah.
that's something I
So
get used to, I'm sure.
yeah, and so right now, for like people's awareness and yours, I've got our actual Zoom call over here. So if I look directly this way, this is me looking at you. Straight ahead of me is me watching the stream and the chat so that I can see if something
Okay.
goes wrong on the stream, I can see it live, what other people see, and then I can see chat. And then
Okay.
slightly off to the right is actually like the streaming software, Streamlabs. So I can see the stream in there too. So I have three different places. Actually, I might take a, do you care if I take a screenshot of this? I think it'd be actually
No,
kind of
not
cool
at
to
all.
share. Let me, one second. I'll share that at some point so you can see all the different screens that I have. So I'm still figuring out the best layout, but this is what I got so far.
Awesome.
Do you want to? So I've spent, and people, if they follow my content, know that I have loved Netlify serverless functions. Getting a lot more into Next.js, which kind of has built-in API serverless function support, which is really nice. But
Hmm.
I've done tons of content on serverless functions, and it's newer for you, right? Do you want to share like maybe your background in serverless functions or what your the first time you saw it or the first time you got to use it, which may have been pretty recently? Just any bit of
Sure.
your background on serverless functions and specifically
Yeah.
Netlify?
It actually occurred to me yesterday that it's actually called Netlify Functions. If
Hmm.
anyone is out there from Netlify,
Yeah.
the serverless we've just been injecting to sort of describe it a little better.
And
But I
I
noticed
don't
that in
do
the
a good job
comments.
of that myself. Yeah.
Well, it's descriptive.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah. The descriptive variable names again.
yeah, totally. Well, I've been working like ever since being at Auth0. Like I said, our extensibility stuff runs off of this same kind of like more or less stateless JavaScript functions. And what that means is you have a function hanging out, until it's ready to be used. That function is handed some data. It does whatever it does. It makes changes. It calls out. It who knows what changes what is sent back. And then it passes something back for another function to do that. So in this world, this is more like actual serverless endpoints. So AWS Lambdas, things that sit out there in the cloud and wait to be used. They're not doing processing. They're not, they don't really have a job except you'll be sent something. you're going to do something and you're going to respond a certain way, right?
Yep.
So I've been using that kind of thing for about a year, partly on this team and partly on my own. But I started with Vercel, which was formerly known as Zeit. They have
Yep.
something very similar to this. They have they call it like their API. Put a file in a folder. It picks up the file. It says, okay, I'm going to run it at this certain endpoint and do a thing. So the Netlify function part was familiar, but actually I just pushed my first one out this morning. You and I had been pairing on one, and I was
Yep.
like, well, I should probably have done this. So 15 minutes before we started, I did it.
Little
And actually,
little
here, I'll
behind the
drop
scenes tip here for people that are watching. Are
yeah,
you
exactly.
you're throwing a link to the function?
I would, but I guess
Does it work or did
I have
it
a
break?
Twitch account. I can't log in.
Oh, you can send it to me in the chat. That might mess up the video for a split second while I kind of maneuver stuff around. But if you want to send it to me in chat, I can pull it up. Let me pop this out. Excuse that. All right, video should be back. Good now, hopefully. While you're pulling up that link, I asked in the chat just if people were using serverless functions at all. Oh, you got it in here. Okay, cool. And Ash built a React serverless demo example with Twilio SMS, so like messaging, text messaging, for a blog on Twilio, which is sweet. I think I've seen that article, Ash. I remember someone asking you about your experience, I think, for you writing that article. So if you want to throw a link to that in the chat too to share with people, feel free. Just got a follow from Maxi Alpha. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And Ash is also working on serverless Twitter clone app with FaunaDB. I'm going to be working on, I'll have a video coming out on FaunaDB and Next.js next Thursday. So keep an eye out for that too. All right, I'm going to pull. Did anyone try the serverless function that Josh just put in the chat? Has anyone tried that yet? Is it a Hello World one? Hello World. Yes, it works.
Yeah, right.
I tried it out on my side. And it's interesting that you mentioned kind of the idea of starting with Zeit or Vercel. And the reason I think that's interesting is I mentioned API stuff being built into Next.js. And that's kind of true, but it's also more specifically true that it's kind of built into Vercel platform, because you don't need Next.js necessarily to have those serverless functions, which I think is kind of what you were getting at. You can have that directory and put a file in there, and that stuff is ready to go. The only difference in Netlify is you have to have a configuration to tell Netlify where that function, or excuse me, where that folder is that holds your serverless function. So Vercel would look for the API folder by default, and then in Netlify, you tell it which folder to look for your functions, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a sort of a key difference of those two. I think Vercel's always been a little more opinionated about that. Next.js itself is a little more opinionated than another framework you might use. So having used both, they're both incredible platforms. I just happen to host my site with Netlify, but I've used Vercel for quite a bit, including internal proof of concept stuff. It's so nice to use that.
And I have yet to host anything on Vercel. I've been using Next a lot for a lot of demos, but I haven't actually deployed anything. I feel like that's the next thing I have to do, is actually try that perspective. And then I can give a true comparison of hosting. And I imagine they're super similar. Like, both are going to be great. Netlify I love because I've got experience with it. Obviously, Vercel is doing a really good job because tons of other people love it as well. But I think it's probably about time that I give it a shot for myself.
Yeah, I would. Their user interface is fantastic, and their DX around their command line stuff is very, very cool. You know, they have a whole local runtime, and you can see it build and do its whole thing. It's a fantastic product. They both are.
Just gotta.
I don't get paid by either, by the way.
Right?
I get paid by Auth0.
So back to the Auth0 stuff.
Yeah, really.
So thinking about, I think one of the big implications in serverless functions is the idea of statelessness. And especially like, this doesn't have to be necessarily related to authentication, but one of the things you hear about a lot is like tracking session. And sometimes tracking sessions, if you have a traditional node application, is done in memory, just kind of inside of the application. But one of the things about serverless functions is that they don't have a consistent in-memory experience. It's ephemeral, it goes away. Any kind of thoughts on like how stuff works differently, things you have to consider when you do serverless functions based on there not being like state kind of built in and ready for you to use?
Yeah, I mean, it affects everything really. You know, when we were working on the project that we're working on, I'm not sure if we can say anything about it, but Um,
I've been
it
saying
probably
stuff
won't be
about
too
it.
surprising. Oh, good. Okay. So
Integration of Auth0 Netlify. Boom.
there you go. Exactly.
And if now I'm breaking the seal, then it's my fault and you won't get in trouble. But I don't think
Yeah.
it's a problem.
Well, maybe you should put it on me if I'm the beginner, and you can say this guy doesn't know anything.
Oh
I
yeah.
just had this idiot on my show, and just started blabbing about.
All right, so
Um,
everybody leave some comments. Oh, Josh, I can't believe you just shared that secret information. That way I can prove by going back through the video and showing the comment stream that it
paper
was you that
trail.
did it. Yeah.
Totally. I see someone saying I should be louder, so I'll try to talk a little louder. I know I should have a microphone, but I'm
Well, and
just not there yet.
I adjusted your audio a bit. I thought our
Okay.
audio levels were pretty even. So let me know if that sounds a little bit better. And if not, I can bump it up some more.
Awesome. So yeah, the stateless part, I think that is something that is hard to get used to, especially if you're doing this for the first time. If you're used to Express, or if you're used to whatever, you're used to storing something somewhere.
Hmm.
Whether that's cache. So if you're calling out to an API and you want to save those results for a minute or 5 minutes or 30 minutes, or if in this case there's a value that we needed, a nonce or state value, you can't put it anywhere. So if it's okay to keep, or if it's not secret, you can store it in a cookie possibly, or you have to use something like a cloud database to do that. So it's yeah, that catches a lot of people, is
Hmm.
thinking like, well, where's the database? Or where, I work in Node all the time, where's the memory store? There isn't any. Like,
Yeah.
this is out in the cloud, it's sitting by itself, it doesn't rely on anything.
Yep. And so it's just a general idea that your serverless functions they wake up and then they go away and they're not always sitting there listening. If you deploy a regular full node server somewhere, that thing is constantly running and listening for requests, which means
Hmm.
it's keeping track of whatever state it has in memory. Serverless functions go up and down. They don't have that.
Hmm.
So that's actually one of the things that we were looking at in the Netlify integration was storing. So part of this authentication workflow is having to send something off, have it come back to you, and then you can validate that the same thing came back, which means you have to track it somehow. And what we
Hmm.
did, like you said, was store some of that stuff in cookies. So you store a cookie, send the user away. When they come back, you check the cookie and then the values that came back from that redirect and see if they're the same thing. We don't have to
Exactly.
get too deep into like the authentication piece. Just know that like you can't just keep track of something in memory, especially across requests. You have to have some other way. You could do a Redis cache database if you wanted to. You could store stuff in cookies, whatever you have to do to set it up.
Yeah.
Swallow has an interesting comment that I think is actually pretty valid. Isn't that more or less like using pure functions? I mean, the whole no side effects model is solid. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like the idea with function or pure functions is that function has everything it needs to do whatever it needs to do. Um,
Sure.
and I guess in that case, it would be like getting stuff out of a cookie or getting stuff out of Redis instead of expecting it to be somewhere else inside of the application itself.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's, you can't build a web application without some kind of state. Like, you have to know something about the user, or something has to be stored somewhere if you're going to authenticate. But yeah, it's very much like that. So everything that you have to use is passed into that function, and nothing else. You can't reach out anywhere except, HTTP calls and things like that.
Yep. There was a comment earlier from Bald Bearded Builder, which is hard to say. Welcome, by the way. I've checked into several of his streams in the past. He uses Netlify functions for short URLs and another to handle comments on my Gridsome blog. So if you have a snippet or a repo to share how you do the short URLs, I don't think those are overly complicated, but I'd be really curious to see like if you do any tracking and stuff with that. That's a really cool idea. And I've thought about doing that with my domain. Like I could in theory do the same sort of thing and have like, all right, probably like, I wonder if jqqcom or like .dev or .io is available. And then I could use that as like a short link. So it'd be jqqcom/something. That would be really nice.
Hey, you have a whole new stream of content
I
just
know,
ready to
right?
go.
Yeah. So if you have some code to share on that, I think that'd be really cool. And then did you say you have your personal site is hosted in Netlify?
Hmm.
Are you using
Yep.
any serverless functions with it? I assume not, because you just did your first one right
I
before the
mean,
stream.
that hello world one,
Okay.
No, I moved from WordPress. I had mine on WordPress for a
Hmm.
very long time. That was a big part of my development career.
I did for a
And I
while too.
just
Yeah.
moved it. Yeah, it's a great platform. I still really love it, but it didn't really fit what I was doing. I wrote a huge long post on it on my website. But
Oh, cool.
yeah, I converted all over to 11D, and put together like
Sweet.
a a sync script, a script that'll build the markdown and the metadata,
Hmm.
and then I just put it out there just to say, like, just to see what it looked like, and it was so fast, so easy. All the lighthouse scores go crazy. I'm writing in Markdown. It was a much better experience, and I didn't really have comments. All I got was spam comments. I didn't really need
Weren't
it. So
too worried about them. Yeah.
no. But what bald
Bald
bearded
bearded
builder
builder.
said,
There you go. That should be like a
um,
challenge for us, is to say that like 5 times fast.
that's a tough one. I'm a bit of a bald bearded builder myself. So
You let it grow out a little bit
um,
more.
yeah. This gets longer than this does. So that's why I keep them both short.
Yeah.
One of the cool things about the Netlify functions is you can plug into their forms functionality. So
Mm-hmm.
you can pick up their form processing and then do your own thing. Like you could store it in a cloud database or put it really wherever. You can make a GitHub PR and store it right in Markdown. It gives a lot of flexibility to Jamstack type sites or static sites that really don't have that functionality built into them.
Are you using Netlify forms at all in your site?
I'm not, but I just
Okay.
switched on analytics, which was really nice experience. They give you like 3 weeks previous to when you turn it on. They'll parse through the older logs and give you some analytics, which is nice.
What sort of, so I feel like I'm not that well versed in analytics as a whole. And someone mentioned that like Next just announced, or Vercel just announced their new analytics in Next.js version 10, or maybe it's, sorry, part of Vercel, like the platform versus Next specifically.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of analytics are you looking for inside the Netlify analytics?
It's all vanity for me. Like I'm not trying to sell anything, or I don't really have anything to promote. So I just kind of wanted to see what the site looks like now versus what it was when it was over on WordPress. And now that I'm writing a little bit more. So I
Just
know
like
Netlify.
general traffic numbers, like how many people visit
Yeah, yeah.
by page or just by the site, or
Yeah, their analytics, they basically show you, I'm looking at it now, page views, unique visitors, top locations, top
okay,
pages. That's a big
cool.
one for me. Like if I wrote something, is anybody looking at it? And then they also have a nice like 404. So everything that's not found, they'll put that up there. So if you miss something, which I see at the top of my 404s is a link I didn't convert over,
Hmm.
you can redirect it or build something there.
Okay, sweet. That's cool. I
Yeah.
don't, is it something you had to turn on? I feel like well, actually, I think isn't it part of like the paid plan? Do you have a paid plan with an Netlify?
It's like it looks like they kind of build it in a way that you can just turn specific things on. So I was on free and I just turned on analytics for $9 a month.
That's what I thought.
And
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
That's
And
why I
what's
haven't done
interesting
it.
is yeah. I kind of felt like, I should give them something back because it's such a great platform. And I was curious about it. So and it looks like they use they parse through server logs rather
Mm-hmm.
than client side like Google Analytics is. So they can go back and give you data that they have
Mm-hmm.
stored. I'm not sure exactly how they do it, but
And it's supposed
cool.
to be, I remember when they released that, they were really bragging that it was like truer or more real analytics, I guess is, I don't know the best way to put that. And
I don't know.
I think they were saying that based on getting it from, I guess, those server logs instead of other things.
Well, yeah, I mean that makes sense in one way. The nice side of client side is you don't really catch any of the spiders or automatic bots crawling your site. So
True.
they
Yeah.
might see absolutely every hit to the page, but they need to take all the extra stuff
True.
out
Yeah.
versus Google Analytics that might, or any of the other client side ones that might have a more accurate, this is a browser that processes JavaScript kind of thing.
Okay.
But
I
they always
wouldn't have
say
thought
like,
about that.
totally. They always say like don't have two analytics running because you're always going to get like different numbers for the two, and you'll never know which one's actually accurate. So pick one, stick with it.
And then you can
Um,
just compare like relative to previous numbers on with that specific analytics, like not comparing across, but comparing based on one.
exactly.
At least if it's high, it'll be consistently high. If it's low, it'll be consistently low, I guess.
Yeah, it's like running two runner trackers at the same
Okay.
time and
Yeah.
saying like, I'll just take the fastest number.
Whichever is better on a given day.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah.
there was so RightUCS asked about an example of real world use of serverless functions. So I'll give you my simplest one on jamesqquick.com. I wanted to have a contact. A lot of people have contact of some sort. And I looked at, to Ken Jones's point and to your point about Netlify forms, I looked at Netlify forms, which seems really great. The thing that deterred me from doing that is that there's a limit. We just got a subscribe from Danny Thompson, by the way. Danny Thompson is one of the TAs and a friend and a community leader. Also TA for the group that I teach at nights. And anyway, Danny, thanks for being here. Thanks for the subscribe. Appreciate it. But I was looking at Netlify Forms for handling that sort of stuff. And Netlify Forms looks great, super simple, all that sort of stuff. The one downside that I saw was that you only get 100 form submissions per month. And I haven't actually crossed that threshold. Like I get maybe 20 in a month, so I wouldn't have to worry about it. But I wanted to not worry about that limit just in case. So instead of that, I decided to do a serverless function, which as a developer is almost as easy. Like I have to write one function that I wouldn't have had to write with Netlify Forms. And so I accept the input from the website. So it submits an HTTP request to my serverless function. I grab that information and then I send out the email myself. And I could have used Netlify Forms. I wouldn't have hit the limit like I thought I might. But in this case, it's really simple enough for me to just add that function and then have control over it. And Ken Jones mentioned Netlify Forms is great. He's thinking about switching away so you're not bound to Netlify. Well, in my case, now that I'm not using Netlify Forms, I'm using a serverless function. I might have to translate that to another platform of some sort, but it still holds true. It's something that I get to control.
Yep. Yeah. It's basically for providing the kind of things you just can't do in Jamstack, right? So you can't receive a post request to a single page app, right? You can do that to a Netlify function. So that's what we're doing with the integration. Another use would be anything that makes an API call that needs a secret of some kind or a token. You can't store that in the browser. Someone will find it and pull it out. So you can keep it somewhere secure. The name for that is like a confidential client is what we call it in the identity world. But it's some entity or some server that can keep a secret. Netlify keeps that quiet. Exactly.
Yep. And that's like I've talked about this in talks and presentations and courses that I've done, is the progression of like, all right, I want to build a Jamstack app. Okay, I can do React on the front end. I can blah, blah, blah. All right, now I need to interact with FaunaDB or Airtable or some sort of database.
Exactly.
I can't use those credentials in the front end. So I have to have something that can store those credentials securely, which in this case, like you said, serverless functions inside of Netlify. They give you inside of the GUI, inside of the dashboard in Netlify, you can add environment variables. I've got environment variables in mine. And then you can write your function to use those environment variables. I will give one other thing. I've been talking about this for a couple of months, and it's like close to the point that I really want to share with people. But my dev desk app, which is at dev, I'll put the link in here. It's hosted on Netlify. This is a place which I would love if people checked out and uploaded a picture. But this is a place where the idea is people can go and upload pictures of their desk setups, because we often have these threads on Twitter where people are sharing all their desk setups, but then those threads get lost. And so you see them for a little bit and then you don't really know where they are again. So I wanted to have a centralized place to have all of that stuff. And all of it is built with Netlify serverless functions. So there's a serverless function to upload an image. There's a serverless function to update your profile. There's a couple of other, I can't remember what the other ones are right offhand. But that is completely driven by serverless functions hosted inside of Netlify.
That's awesome.
To Swarlow's question, have I migrated to Next.js? I have not. I literally was like thinking about doing that like yesterday, and I still haven't done it. But I would like to move it to Next.js at some point. But for now, I can do my entire backend in Netlify serverless functions, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome. Those are some pretty awesome setups. I should probably submit mine, right?
Yeah. So I think it should send you a piece of feedback to show you this, but I don't have an automated way yet to guarantee that people are uploading appropriate images. And appropriate means different things. Like it could be appropriate, but not fit the purpose of the site. So someone, as a joke, uploaded something. It wasn't inappropriate, but it just didn't fit. It wasn't a desk setup. And these, like, for this to be a site where that's what you're looking for, it needs to be pretty controlled. So right now I will add that. I will create or save your image, and I'll save a record with a checkbox that is not checked. So it's not approved by default, and I will go in and manually look at it and make sure. So it won't show up immediately, but I can, after we get done, I can go take a look and approve it. And then it'll be out there. So if anybody else wants to go check it out, please do.
Nice.
There was one question from Ken Jones about the email sender that I use. So I use the SendGrid, which was bought by Twilio. couple of years ago. I don't know how recent that was, to be quite honest. But I
Yeah,
use their API, and actually I can grab the GitHub. I'll grab the code, and people can go look at it and see. It's pretty simple.
very cool.
Let me go get to the functions directory, and there's only one. There's the contact, and then you can see what's in there. Hey, Mansaf is here. Question: is there a way to change the Twitter handle on a post? I recently changed, and it's linking to the old one. So for your benefit, Josh, this is tying in using Auth0 authentication. It's tying in with Twitter. And right now, as the user logs in with Twitter, I then need to save that information inside of Airtable, like their user ID and the link to their image. And the reason is that I want to know about all users. That's how I'm able to like display the profile page for any given user, in addition to just the logged in one. So question here, and I don't know the best way to handle this, is there a way to update the Twitter handle? And not that I know of, or I haven't done that yet. And I don't know what the best way, like I would have to, as a user logs in, maybe check with what's in my database. And then if it's different, update it. Does that make sense?
I'm not totally sure.
Yeah.
But if you change it right in Airtable, what is that? It won't associate with the person logging in?
Yeah. Because basically the handle is the unique identifier for the user in my database, if that makes sense.
You could create another table to map them, and then you could have multiple mapping. So if you wanted to add something other than Twitter, you could now map them to multiple users.
True. I'll have to think about that. That's a good point. I assume that doesn't happen very often, but Mansa has obviously done it. So it's something to consider. And if anyone wants to create a PR or an issue on there to help me to suggest an idea how to do it, that'd be great. I don't know if Ken Jones put a puppy picture in the chat, and if you've seen streams before or anything I do, there's always a dog in the background. So Lily's back there sleeping very peacefully with all the streaming stuff going on.
Your voice is so soothing.
Yeah, she can't help but fall asleep every time. Let me know in the chat what other questions do you have? Again, like could be Netlify specific, could be serverless functions, could be Next.js, could be a bunch of different things. But we kind of started with the serverless topic in general, and we're about 40 minutes in. So do you have any backlog ideas for maybe in your personal time of things you would like to build or test out with serverless functions in general?
I did want to explore the authentication stuff a little bit more. That's really fascinating to me. Netlify, as we were talking to them, we learned that they have their own open source identity server that they use for Netlify identity, and that was one of the things we wanted to talk to them about, which is why would you pair with us if you already have identity? And the big thing for them was our user management, all the things that we do that aren't just basic login, essentially. So seeing kind of how we integrated, learning how they do their whole identity thing, which is basically they store a JWT in a cookie. The cookie authenticates with these serverless functions automatically. It just picks up the token, verifies the token, validates it. And once you're valid, I think you can check the identity right in your serverless function, which is kind of cool. Oh, now I'm talking and he's like,
that's what
I'm out of here.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all right. So it was really interesting to tie our system to their system and say, we had the two tokens coming together. Ours is a OpenID Connect web token. Theirs is more of a proprietary token that they use to validate. It was really interesting to see those two come together. And it kind of calls out sort of, someone asked earlier, I think, about authentication on these things, or you were talking about it. You can either use Netlify's sort of authentication layer, which is that token that we build, or you can use straight access tokens, right? These are stateless APIs, so you can validate an access token just like you would any other access token, which could be one that we generate, could be one from somewhere else. As long as it's signed and can't be tampered with, that's another way to authenticate against these things.
Yeah, so this is actually for people, if you were here last week in the stream, Lee Robinson from Vercel, actually, this was like the Friday before Next.js conf. So he kind of like did a little bit of a hint of like, oh, just like be looking forward to Next.js conf because there's some exciting stuff coming. But we talked about like the topic was Next.js and authentication, and it comes down to those two exact points. You can either do client side routing. I got called out on a YouTube video for saying client side rendering, client side routing, authentication, which is basically the exact same thing that you would do with React. So if you're using Next.js or if you're using React and you host it on Netlify or whatever, if you're doing it client side, we've got the Auth0 React library, and it handles all that stuff. And what the output, the result of that is typically you get two things back: the ID token, just general information about the user that you could use to display the user's username or basics or avatar, things like that. Then you get the access token, and the access token is a JWT in this case that you would send to your APIs, and embedded in that is some sort of information that could then be used to do authentication and authorization on API endpoints. You could say, hey, I just care if the user is a real user, or you could be going to a level of granularity where you're checking for specific permissions. Does this user have the permission to do this thing? And actually, if you look at dev setups, if anybody looks at the source code there, it's actually using that strategy. So it's doing client-side routing. It's just a create React app. And so that authentication piece is pretty separate from the backend. It just connects by sending those JWTs. And the flip side of that, the integration stuff that we're working on with Netlify, is using Netlify's built-in RBAC, role-based access control stuff. And with that, they have the ability to check for the Netlify JWT that's in a cookie. And as you make a request to a page, they will intercept or look at that request, check to see if you have the right permission to get to that page, and if not, shoot you down. So those are the two like common approaches. If you've got like a front end site, you're either doing authentication on client side or you're doing it on server side. You can also kind of mix them, but those are the two general like breakdowns of how authentication works in those spaces.
Yeah. Yep. You got it. Yeah. It gets really, really confusing, if you don't work in this stuff every single
Yep.
day. So, any questions anyone has about that, we're happy to answer those.
And that was, I've been like enamored honestly with Next.js the last couple of months since trying it out. And the reason is it's so easy to fluctuate between those two scenarios. Like you can do server side rendered authentication or data or whatever, and you can do client side routing, same stuff, right? And so to be able to kind of easily switch between those has been the thing that I've been most interested in and enjoyed the most so far.
It's a very cool platform. Our marketplace external site runs on Next.js. And it pulls all the data, all the integration data is the same data you can see in our dashboard. So it pulls down JSON every, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, something like that.
So it does the
statically renders it.
What's the word for the incremental static generation stuff?
It's technically server-side rendered, and then just the rendered portion of it is cached. I'm not sure if there's a special name for that.
Okay.
But because it makes an API call, like a blocking API call, we didn't want to do that all the time.
Okay. There is someone help me out in the chat. There's a feature in Next.js, which is basically what you're saying, where you can have a static build, but then some parts of it, you can tell it to basically like refresh the static build every certain amount of time. And incremental SSG, maybe somebody help me out and let me know in the chat.
So it's not like it processes the static generation, which probably could do that. I mean, you can do so much with this platform. But it definitely, if you click around, like it's quite fast, and it's pulling down quite a bit of JSON. It could be chopped up a little bit, but
yeah,
that's been my first experience working with that platform, and it's fantastic.
cool.
It's the components that we use in there. The reason we use it is we use React in our dashboard. We're using React in Marketplace. They share components. We need some way to build this out. So Next.js just kind of made sense, and made for a really, really performant, solid application. So the only downside is it does so much that oftentimes it can be a little bit of a black box to mess around with. But it's very clear, and I've enjoyed it so far.
Got a couple of comments in the chat about static regeneration is, I think, the term. And Swarlow, I apologize for not realizing that's what you said. I assumed you just said static generation, and so I kind of just missed your comment because I missed the re part. So static regeneration. And that seems like one of the coolest features. And Lee last week was also saying you could just do this hybrid stuff that I've heard people talk about. I've never done it myself, where like if you have a really super huge application or really super huge blog, and you can't afford every build time to build all the pages. You could say like, all right, build the most common or the most visited 100 or 1,000 pages, and then for the other ones, let those basically be server side rendered, and then cache them or generate the static page after it's sent down the first time. So then
Yeah.
you're only like, for those extra ones, you're only actually generating the pages as you need them, and then they're good to go. I thought that was
Yeah.
really, really cool.
Yeah, really cool. And another part of that on the conference, I only caught the first couple hours of it, but when they were talking about the e-commerce, like a static
Mm-hmm.
e-commerce site, like that's fantastic. You know, that
Mm-hmm.
those benefit greatly from conversion. Same on our marketplace. We wanted that to go quick. You know,
Super
it's not a
fat.
lot of
Yeah.
information.
And then you still have the ability, because they touched on this too with the e-commerce stuff, you can do a combination of all of it. So if you have stuff that changes, like you could do your images and your descriptions and stuff statically,
Hmm.
and then your prices, if they change enough, those you could pull in with hydration on the client side to get the real-time prices.
Yeah.
So it's so cool just being able to customize and kind of use whatever you want there. Swarlo commented, has anyone checked out the new image component in Next.js? I have, and I want to create a video on it super soon as I can. The one thing I'm missing, I don't know if anyone can help me out. So I use this image component, and I can tell when I resize the browser, it's updating the requested size of that image. So if it's here, it's requesting like a 1280 width image. If it's here, now it's 700. If it's here, it's 320. Which it does that, as well as it does lazy loading. So it won't load it, or what's the other, like it won't load it until you scroll down to it. Is that just lazy loading?
It's lazy. Yeah.
Okay. It won't do it until you scroll down to it. That's really nice. But the only problem I haven't figured out, and it may just be me, is as I shrink the browser, it updates the size of the image that it requests, but it still displays it over the original 1280 pixels wide. So it grabs a smaller image, but then it's stretching it out to fill that space. And I don't know how to make, or if there's something I'm supposed to do to actually make the image responsive. As soon as I figure that out, I will do a video on it, but I haven't gotten a clear answer on how that works yet.
So it's a very tough problem to solve.
And I thought that was like in their documentation, they talk about it being responsive.
Hmm.
And I would have thought that would actually update like the displayed size of the image, but something is not clicking, and I just haven't figured it out. So if anybody has any tips there or has figured it out, definitely let me know. Swarlo commented that the image component feels a bit off. Swarlo, I'd be curious to hear why, and if there's anything to change. 2 wrapping divs with the absolute positioning and the margin trick, along with inline styles, make it. Oh, so they do they do some sort of magic where they translate it to not just an image component, but there's like container wrapping divs around it, and then do some trick. Anyway, another one about intrinsic sizing, maybe so. This is where I've got to figure it out, so I'll look into that too. Well, if you have questions, feel free to ask them. Anything else that you're technology wise that you're excited about, or maybe we are leveraging at Auth0 that's modern relevant stuff?
The Next.js thing, big time in the marketplace. I think a big thing I'm still very excited about is the marketplace that we're working on right now. Writing integrations has given a
Mm-hmm.
really cool perspective on our platform. You know, you work with partners that want to succeed with us, and we want to succeed with them. Big, companies that are bigger than us, like OneTrust and Onfido, and even smaller startup-sized ones. And it's been really cool to work with them on the platform and kind of learn what's hard to write integrations, how, where the documentation could get better, where examples could get better. But it's coming from somebody that really wants it to succeed, and
Mm-hmm.
seeing it more like, we're not going to be using you to log in. We have our own system over here, but we're going to be writing integrations for customers. So it's been such a cool perspective. I've learned a lot, and we've talked to 30, 40 some odd partners, and they're always really, really positive, really, interesting technologies, seeing like really the bleeding edge of like identity verification
Mm-hmm.
and blockchain identity and consent
Oh, cool.
management and anomaly detection type stuff. there's companies working on some really, really interesting stuff. And, it's all the kind of thing. We're not going to build a machine learning platform for identity checking, but our customers will
Someone else
benefit
might.
greatly from that.
Yeah.
And someone else is. There's plenty of
Right.
them.
Yep.
If you go to the marketplace, there's an identity proofing category.
Hmm.
So that's really, really fascinating to me. Also, we just came out with events. Or not events. Oh my gosh, actions.
Okay. I was like, I totally don't know what events
Like
is.
what?
What did I miss?
You missed nothing. You missed me misspeaking there. We just put a blog post about it, but this is a thing we've been working on for about a year, and it's the next level of extensibility. It's called actions, and if you look at it, I just noticed today that it's same kind of thing, stateless JavaScript, but the parameters that you pass into it are the same as a Netlify function. So there's an event and there's a context,
Hmm.
and I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but that's where we're going with extensibility is, something that you can fire these events instead of just at login and a few other places everywhere. So our whole
Oh,
platform will have triggers and actions and everything else. So that's really cool to be a part of. I'm not actually building that system, but helping them test it out and use it. And it's great. The user interface is awesome. You can try it in Australia now, and it should be out in the next couple of weeks everywhere.
yeah. So there's a couple of things that I think are really cool. Like on the integration piece, you get exposed to a lot of different companies and a lot of different products. And I think that's really
Yeah.
interesting. Again, like that's kind of, well, actually, I say again, this was something I did this morning. I recorded a video on the 5 things I've learned from doing videos. And one of them is like, I've just learned a bunch of random technical stuff because I
Yeah.
kind of forced myself to create videos on technical topics that I think will be relevant that I may or may not know that well yet. So I go and like do research and learn about them. And because of that, I like am at least dabble in a bunch of different things. Like I'm not an expert probably in any of them, but I at least have
Mhm.
a pretty good exposure to lots of different technologies. And I assume you get to do the same kind of thing just from being around, like osmosis, being around these integrations, seeing them. Like maybe you're kind of hands-on a part of it, maybe you're not, but just seeing and hearing and then seeing the result come out, I think would get that like kind of fun exposure to different companies, different products, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's been really cool. Working with Netlify in particular, it's just such a dynamic team, and you really feel like, oh wow, our company cultures are pretty similar.
Hmm.
Super talented folks, and what's another cool part of it is it's like it's teaching back and forth. So they're teaching me about identity
Hmm.
verification and their platform and legal requirements and compliance, and learning about knowledge-based authentication and the kind of stuff they can do with IDs now. They can just scan it, give you some confidence level, take a selfie, match the two up. It's all automated. None of it's manual anymore. So teaching them Auth0 platform and learning from them all this cool new technology.
Hmm.
It's been a really cool place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of, I mean, like especially culturally, you said Netlify, especially just fun companies, right? Like just fun people
Hmm.
to work with and get to learn from.
Yeah.
Um, and then the idea of like actions is the full customizability, extensibility of the platform. Like Auth0 can do so much, but if you have something that you need, and this is not just an Auth0 idea, right? This is a lot of not authentication, even specifically, a lot of other platforms have hooks that you can tap into and you can kind of define how to do something custom. And that gives like developers anytime we feel like we need something specific. For me, I didn't want to use Netlify forms because of potential cost. So I'm a
Hmm.
developer. I created a function, right? Like it's kind of the same general idea. Whatever gap you have, you can usually fill. And it is really exciting just to like have that availability there for people that are using the platform. And Ash commented just on the custom triggers of how that sounds awesome. So I'm looking forward to spending some more time there.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Really cool place to be right now.
Swarlow is asking if I figured out my WebP GIF problem, and I'll send a link. So the answer is yes, because Canute from Sanity. Have you used Sanity or know very much about like headless CMSs and stuff like that?
I know generally, and I've definitely heard of Sanity, and I know they stole one of our employees.
Oh yes, they did. Kapehe was on the stream 2 weeks ago actually to talk about her path to getting into DevRel
Oh, cool.
at Sanity, and so they ended up hiring 2 DevRels at the same time, Kapehe and Brian, both of which are friends of mine. So it was really cool for me because as they were going through the interview process, they would say like, "Oh yeah, I feel like it went well," and I was like rooting for both of them. I don't think anyone knew that they were actually going to hire 2 people, so it worked out really cool to know both of them personally and get to like interact and work with them on a professional level too, just kind of like collaborating on content.
Very cool.
So what the issue was is Sanity is a headless CMS, which means basically it's really a database with a GUI. And then from your front end, whatever front end you use, in my case, Gatsby, you go and pull your information and you use it to display it on your website. So as opposed to WordPress that you mentioned before, where everything is really tied together, front end, back end, now you've got a pretty strict separation of here's your back end data that also has a GUI. So like headless CMS is kind of a weird term for that, but it's got a dashboard where you can see your stuff and enter your stuff, but it's basically just your database. And then you've got the front end layer. So in my recent blog post, which I don't know if you've seen, I did one on the Auth0 Express OpenID Connect library, and I posted that video to the YouTube channel, and then did an article that I put on my blog, and then cross-posted a couple of places. Inside of there, I wanted to have a GIF that showed what the login process looked like. So inside of Sanity, they have like an image component, and you usually just drag an image over, and that's an image in your post. And so instead, I drug over a GIF because I wanted again to show that. And Gatsby image, when Gatsby image gets a hold of that information, it tries to optimize it, and it tries to request that thing as a WebP. So WebP is like the smallest format, I guess, now for media in the browsers, but not all browsers support it. So Gatsby image will convert and say, hey, give me the WebP version of that thing if I'm on a browser that supports it. The problem is by telling it to get WebP, it then treats it as a WebP image instead of a .gif, which is an animated image. So I uploaded it as a GIF, it pulled it in my blog post as a regular image, and I didn't know how to fix it. So in Gatsby, you basically write this translation layer where, like, for the rich text or the main text from your post that's inside of Sanity, I created that image component. Now, when I translate that thing to Gatsby to React, what does that transformation look like? And so the only thing I did, which Canute from Sanity helped me with, was if the extension of that image is .gif, basically don't use Gatsby image. Just use a regular image tag in HTML. Otherwise, use Gatsby image to take advantage of like the optimizations and stuff there. So it worked. Like after I fixed it, it worked well. And in that blog post, you can scroll down and see a couple of different GIFs, and it's really cool.
How long have you been using Gatsby for?
So I did a similar transformation to what you did, it sounds like, where I went from WordPress, and this was before I really considered myself a web developer, where I didn't know if I had the skills to do stuff myself. And I hit limitations in WordPress where I wanted more control as a developer. And I guess it's been, it's hard, a year and a half or two. It's kind of hard to believe. And so I was hearing about Gatsby on podcast and people talking about it on Twitter, and I decided to give it a shot and ended up moving everything over to Gatsby, and I was using embedded Markdown like you said you are. And I didn't really like having that much. I just felt like it bloated my repository, and I wanted some tooling around it. And so I looked at headless CMS options. Sanity gave me some really positive feedback and comments and stuff on Twitter and some direct messages. I did a couple of streams where Canute, head of DevRel from Sanity, joined, gave tips, and then he joined me on the actual stream. And so at that point, I was really sold and migrated everything from embedded Markdown to Sanity, and haven't looked back since. That's been in the last 6 months was probably when I started to move over to Sanity.
Okay, so you write in Sanity, you manage content in Sanity, and then it just outputs. Does it like you change it and then it built it, or how's that work?
So I can publish my content on Sanity, which basically just means it's live in their database. And then just like your site would be, you have to do another build of your site to go and get the latest information. So you can do drafts in Sanity, you can publish it, but that doesn't necessarily publish it to your site. It's your site's responsibility to go and get the latest version of the data.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's still serving static pages, but they're built from, that makes sense.
So
you can actually do the same in WordPress. WordPress can be configured to
do a headless CMS.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of work on that lately is folks saying, I really don't want to convert the back end. I like the editor. I like how that all works, but the theming layer is what I want to get rid of.
Yep.
If I was still working in WordPress, I probably would do that.
And that, it works perfectly. I think lots of people give WordPress a lot of shit just because of different reasons, but I think they kind of overlook, like, there's this modern idea of headless CMS. WordPress can do that for you. They've got APIs, they've got GraphQL layers and plugins that you could use in Gatsby as well. You could do it the exact same thing. I don't know how like rich text translates. So like when you use the WordPress editor, how does it work to translate that to HTML? The way it works with Sanity is like you write the conversion components, like you have the
Sure.
serializers, and this is say, when I get this thing, translate it to this. How does it do that with, I don't know if you even know, but in WordPress, you write in their editor. Does WordPress then just give you HTML from that point?
I think it can go a number of different ways, and it may have changed a bit since they're all in on the Gutenberg, their new editor. But as far as I understood it, when I was writing against it before, there's a built-in JSON API in WordPress now, and it basically gives you the post in JSON as you would get it in your theme variables. So you would get a process version of the HTML, which would include short codes, filtering, all that kind of stuff. And you would just use that process version, just like you would use, if anybody's familiar with it, the content, right? That gives you it pulls out of the database, runs all the conversion in HTML, does all the stripping out all of the extra like script tags and things like that, processes all the short codes in whatever order it does that, then any other plugins that add certain things onto it, and
Okay.
then spits out just JSON. So you'd write it against that. Though I'm guessing there's also plugins right now that that do something different, or if you need it in a different format. But I would always tend towards the core API when possible.
Yeah. So that
Yeah.
makes sense. So they would be doing the translation layer to the HTML. The cool, so it goes both ways. Like maybe it's cumbersome or maybe it's cool. Thing with Sanity is you have full control over that. So you can create custom components in Sanity. So if I wanted to add a YouTube video, I can create a component that says, give me the URL, give me the image, give me the title, or social links here. Give me the type of link, give me the link itself, give me the text that you want displayed. So you can create those custom components, and then you have the ability to translate that on the front end to whatever you want with the
Yeah.
serializers. So it's kind of cool to be able to control that fully. Although you don't have to, like you don't have to do a lot. They've got built-in serializers that do the majority of the stuff for you.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating right now. It used to be that the hard thing to overcome was actually writing the code. And these days, becoming a developer, the hard thing isn't so much the code, because there's so many resources and teachers like yourself online and whatnot. The hard part is, how do I build this thing? You have so many different options, and when you come into this and you start hearing about, if you're brand new to this, even if you know how to write great code,
Yep.
learning about like what is a headless CMS, a static generation, all that stuff, it's fascinating. And if you've had experience building stuff, it's nice to have all those different options. But if you're getting started or writing a new app, it can be just dizzying, the number of
Absolutely.
choices, and it
Yep.
all feels like, oh my gosh, I really have to pick this the right way, or else who knows what's going to happen.
And that's just kind of the ecosystem of
Hmm.
web development. It's really cool, right? From people who've been around for a little bit, who have an idea of the landscape and the different pieces. It's really nice because you have options. But yeah, it
Hmm.
is overwhelming if you're just looking to get started. And that's
Yeah.
why like things like Hashnode and Dev.to for starting a blog are really great. Like you don't have to
Yeah.
write any code yourself. You can just write posts, and then later on, as you become more comfortable in your skills, I used WordPress for a while, and then I wanted to build something myself, and I did,
Hmm.
and I learned all these tools and how to put them together along the way. And that learning process was really valuable.
Yeah.
Ash commented about, or and Swallow was asking, don't they have webhooks? Yes, they do have webhooks where I could trigger a build on my site when I publish an article. I don't necessarily all the time want to build my site when I publish. Most likely I do. So it probably wouldn't be a problem. I'm trying to think if there is a case where I wouldn't want that, but I don't have it set up now, but I could. But I have a button, I have a plugin in my Sanity editor that it gives me a button to deploy my site. So as soon as I publish, I can go click the button. So it's not like it's a big hassle, although automating is certainly nice.
Can you preview?
Yes. So the way that I preview is two different things. I think I set it up on my develop subdomain. So I guess if people go there, they'll see some dummy content. Develop.jamesqquick.com is connected to my develop branch. And in there, it's got flags that say, go and grab the live data,
Okay.
even if it's not published. That way I
Okay.
can preview if I want to, and I can preview at a consistent develop.jamesqquick.com. Although I need to make sure that I'm not putting out like some sort of offensive content accidentally or something inappropriate. I don't know why I
Not
would,
you.
but yeah.
I actually have a pretty good story about that. I used to use just random words as like lorem ipsum filler
Mhm.
text for new sites. And one time something was frustrating me, and I put a bunch of swear words in dummy text, and I never took it out
Yeah.
and did the whole presentation to a client, and it was just like effing this S word, da 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 da. I was like, sorry about that. That's really, I was just having a
Oh
frustrating time with
gosh.
this thing, and I never use it again.
Talking
So
about like
embarrassing.
spooky Halloween stories of people like just like horror stories of development. That would certainly be one of them. I did
Yeah.
something similar. One of my very first videos I put on YouTube, it was a series on game development, and something was pissing me off, same exact thing. And like the comment I had, I don't even know what it said. It was inappropriate. And people watched it. People were watching the video. No one noticed. A friend of mine was like, "Hey, is it supposed to say that?" And I was like, "Nope, absolutely not." So I had to re-record, or not re-record. I just like spliced that part out to make sure that
Sure.
it couldn't be seen. But yeah, Dev
Clarity
Lily.
evidence.
Yep. Dev Lily is commenting dev.2 is nice. Hashnode is cool and new. I'm cross-posting to both of those. And Mansav sounds like a horror story from Syntax. When are they doing their live? I don't know if you know this, the Syntax podcast with Wes Boss and Scott Talinsky. They've been doing it for a couple years, and today is their first like call-in podcast where they're letting people call in and ask questions. I think I just don't know what time it is.
I don't know. I don't actually listen to development podcasts or anything like that. I'm kind of, I'm mostly reading, but
Mhm.
anything that Wes Boss puts out, I'm all for.
Yeah, it's hard. Those are two people that it's hard for them to put out content that you're not going to want to see or hear or take.
Totally. Yeah, yeah, he's awesome online. I went through his Node class, and
Yeah.
the amount of care he puts into even
Yep.
your sample application. You load this thing up, and you're like, this thing's
Mhm.
gorgeous. How did you do that? You have all the code right there. It's so much to learn.
That's one of the big things I feel like I'm missing, because his demos just look so great. Like
Hmm.
it's not necessarily what you're teaching in the class, but it makes it look so much more legit for people to see these amazing landing pages that he creates and the amazing demos, and it goes a long way.
Yeah.
So they are doing they're about to start. They're doing their live version in 20 minutes, which is nice. I think we're about kind of ready to wrap up, so I'll